Okay guys, with the Crosley behind me, I went back to the shed and grabbed out this beautiful little Emerson receiver, and I've already done some due diligence on it. It's a model R156. It was introduced, I think, in 1937. Some of the advertising information, I'll pop it up here on the screen. You can see it was called the Miracle 5. Interesting names they gave these things. In a cool retail price of $19.95 back in the day. Of course, if you lived in the West or South, expect to pay just a little bit more. One thing I did notice in some of the advertising, an Emerson water slide decal should be somewhere in this area, so the radio has probably been refinished at some point in time. Again, it's a beautiful, from the factory, hand-rubbed walnut cabinet, and it was noted as one of the Ingraham cabinets. You can see the beautiful inlay going down the sides. I'll try to brighten things up in some future content that better shows the beauty of the inlays. And I do have some chips down here on the bottom, may or may not show up in the lighting. That was probably pretty common back in the day, where the veneer got caught on something and snapped off at this location and this location. The sides are pretty clean. I can probably get by without refinishing this cabinet. That's why I chose it. I think just some touch-up. I may be able to fix or blend in some of the bottom area down here just using some of my lacquer pens. That's possible. It appears to have the original grill cloth, as you can see. The dial cover is busted right in this area, but no big deal. We can reproduce one of those if it's too much of an eyesore. It appears to have the original knobs, which is cool. The tube complement's interesting for the receiver. Of course, it's that 5-tuber, marketed as the Miracle 5. It picks up the common broadcast band, and then of course the old police band that runs up to about 4 megahertz or so. Superheterodyne design with the typical automatic volume control, the tone control that I mentioned, and the loudspeaker or speaker itself is 6-inch electrodynamic, and the output using the type 41 tube is around 3 watts, is what was advertised. One thing interesting in the writers, this thing is featured twice, volume 8, page 31, then writers 9, page 5. There's an early version and a late version. The difference is the tube complement. The differences being in the early version, a 78 tube was used. Let's turn this thing around. And I have no idea what we're going to find in here. You can see it's untouched, so we'll pull it out and look. But the 78 was used for the IF amplifier. Later on, the 6D6 replaced it. And then if I'm looking at my documentation correctly, the 75 was also used in the early version, later replaced with the 6Q7. So that's the changes to the tube complement from the early to the latter version, if I'm reading the documentation correctly. It looks to be in pretty good shape though. Like I said, the cabinet looks really good, and you can see the cabinet stamped 156. Let me zoom in on that. Right in this area. And you can see the serial number there. 1280914, 105 to 125 volts, 60 cycles, 45 watts. Little handwritten note for somebody, ground plus antenna. And then you have this adjustment at this location as well, which I can't move. We'll check into that. Let me get the fasteners loose from the bottom and pull the chassis out, and we'll take a look at things. And see the line cord was added on to at one point in time. Well, before I pull the chassis out too, I was just doing some research on worldradiohistory.com. It's just a great resource. Back in Radio News, 1940, I think it was the March edition, they used to list a lot of common failures for many of the receivers as such after they had been in operation for years. One thing common for this particular chassis, again, which was used in the R152, 153, 156, and 158, there were about 5 different things called out. Weak reception. It sounds like a shorted primary antenna coil was somewhat common. In addition, the resistors creating distortion. There was a 10 meg ohm that appeared to be open, called out as R8. We'll look at that later on the schematic. And then another distortion issue. It's a 5 meg ohm resistor that ties back to the 75 tube. And then an audio coupling capacitor for distortion, probably around the type 41 audio tube. And then one concerning was a noise issue where the oscillator coil itself fails. So we'll see. Hopefully we won't have any of those issues along the way, but time will tell. Thought that was kind of neat to run across that and see some of the common failures back in the day. Alright, let me go ahead and get those screws out, get the knobs off the front, get the speaker disconnected here from the plug, and pull out this old chassis. A little interesting here, one little set screw that holds the loudspeaker plug in. Your typical 4-prong plug, output transformer, and of course the field coil, since this is a electrodynamic loudspeaker. And 2 more to go. Okay, I got that last knob off, and I'm not sure if that center knob is actually period correct or not. All the others push on, and this one has the set screw, even though it is marked correctly for band switch. Always fun to pull these things out for the first time. Let me get the cabinet out of the way. Okay, there's a pretty good look at the chassis itself. Looks pretty clean, really. Just dust and dirt, maybe a little surface rust or flash rust, but not bad. Kind of strange, the one tube or valve here, just laying out. Looks like I've got the later model. The tube sockets are marked. Let me zoom in here on the left. This is the 6 Delta 6. So not the most early chassis that was put together. We'll make sure all the other tubes match the later edition as well. This looks like a Type 75 tube, which comes back to the early edition, even though again this tube socket is marked 6 Delta 6. And the tube socket itself is also marked Type 75. So maybe this is kind of in that crossover period. Interesting. And the Type 41 audio tube. And marked accordingly. Again, both the early and late versions use the same 41 power output tube. This should be our rectifier tube. And it is marked a Type 80 on the tube socket. And I can just make that out under the right angle, type 80. And the last tube over here is marked 6 alpha 7 on the tube socket. And that matches the tube itself. So what do we have here? We've got the 6 alpha 7 in place. We've got a 6 delta 6 at this location, where a 78 tube was used in the early edition. And then we had the 75 tube at this location. The late model was the 6Q7. Kind of interesting, we're somewhere in between there with the 6 delta 6 being used. Alright, don't know about you guys, but waited long enough. Let's flip this thing over and see what it looks like. Not bad. One of those deep chassis that's kind of a pain to work in, but very few components in this receiver. You just see a handful of resistors and very few capacitors as well. A very simple set, it appears at a glance. And it looks fairly clean underneath. Okay guys, I think we'll stop there. Again, it was just a quick intro and first look at this Emerson Model R156 from 1937. Should make for another fun and interesting little project. Again, a simple little 5-tuber known as the Miracle 5. I appreciate you guys watching. Everyone out there, take care and stay well. What the heck, before we leave off, let's check the DC resistance of the output transformer and field coil. Make sure we're good there. Okay, perfect. That should be our output transformer, the primary, at 490 ohms. And now the field coil. Ouch. We have a problem.